For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Award-winning broadcaster Iman Rappetti is in conversation with Polity about her second book titled Sermons of Soul. So, Iman, for the benefit of those who were not listening to you at Power Talk, can you tell us how the idea of this book started?
So I used to do a radio show on Power 987 in Johannesburg between, I think it was 2014 and 2019, so for about 5 years. And I started with just playing around with little messages to my listeners because I kind of felt like a lot of times as radio broadcasters or as broadcasters in general, you never really get to make that eye contact with people. So I wanted to write something that was just for my listeners, but it comes from a message that was happening in society. So whether it was something in a national headline or something bad or good happened, I decided to pen these little messages to my listeners. And before I knew it, it just evolved into this, these pieces of writing. And soon I collected hundreds of them.
And it was interesting to read that some of these sermons came to you while you were driving to work. What were some of the triggers?
So I'd be driving. I mean, there's one sermon about, and there was, I assume, because I also make up stories in my head, which I just claimed in the book, like where I was just projecting a picture that I divined out of what I was seeing. So I remember one day I was looking at what I assumed was the father holding his little boy on his shoulders, and the little boy's feet were bouncing off the dad's shoulders, and they were walking as if he was going to leave him at preschool or at creche. And it made me think about how beautiful that connection is, to have a father take care of his son, in that way, taking him to school, I imagined, and having that safety and stability. Other days I would see, homeless people at the side of the road, kind of waking up to greet the day. And what struck me was what the color palette of homelessness is. It's just these endless shades of gray that eventually meet the tarmac and blend into the tarmac, almost visible but invisible. And it would just make me think about other elements in our existence, of things we have a blind spot to, or things we don't even see anymore. And I felt it was important to put those experiences to words in a way that would remind us that we're not the only ones here.
And after reading this book, Iman, it felt as if when someone is in need of a wake-up call, or maybe if someone is down and out, will this book help them?
So I try not to give prescriptions, Sane, to people of how they should encounter my book and how they should read. What I would hope for is, in whatever they read on this page, is up an internal connection, whether it is about how unpredictable life is, and yet we have everything that we need within ourselves to be able to deal with and roll with whatever life throws us. Or if it's about a call to action, something we might not have thought about, that maybe we finally open our eyes to and realize, oh, I didn't think about it quite that way, and maybe I can get involved. Or endless themes. There's so many different themes in this book that I feel could resonate with people on any given day. At least that's the hope.
And your show had regular callers, as all the talk show hosts have.
Yeah.
And can you tell us how that made this sermon special?
So I have this weird confession to make about my listeners, especially those that would tweet me. I'd go back and look at their profile pictures just to see, so if I'm talking to, fortunately with Ike Kumalo, who was one of my most regular callers and somebody we really kind of, boxed with every day. I got to meet him. He came to the studio to meet me, and so I could put a face to the name. But other people, I would look at their avatars and I felt more connected to the faces. And even if I wasn't able to see the callers' faces on the, on the call-ins every day, just by building a relationship with them on what their preferences were, their points of view on different things, I really felt like they weren't just anonymous seas of people every day, that they were people that I knew and was speaking to directly.
And I liked how you compared eating to nourish our bodies and malnourishment to feeding our minds. Can you briefly share how this relates?
So these themes, even especially on the malnourishment themes, are themes that recur at different points in the book. So if we're writing about the need for love and affection, when we see malnourishment in its anatomical form, we can see the jutting bones and the sharp edges of malnutrition. And as a journalist, I've encountered stories where you encounter those kinds of images in people. And I began to think about the need for love, the need for tenderness and care, that it's possible to feel malnourished in those spaces. So how do we begin to give ourselves a good diet of self-care, of connecting with people who will be there to take care of us when we're not taking care of ourselves? But I think also intellectually speaking, Sane, the diet that we feed ourselves, whether it is by accident, through, or deliberate rather, through the system of education that we have, where I don't believe we get enough nourishment from a consciousness perspective or a more evolved idea of what our history and location is. That kind of malnourishment, we do have the opportunity as we get older to address by making sure that we feed ourselves with intellectualism or a range of different thinking that will challenge our own dogma. Because I think dogma is one of the primary sort of handcuffs or chains that keep us riveted to a spot and don't allow us to grow.
And it was also interesting when you spoke about those people who can bounce out of any situation. These people can even navigate through bad situations and they won't complain. Why do we have to strive to be like them?
Because elasticity is a boon. When things are rigid and they are brittle, they break easily. But if you can bend where it is appropriate to bend, or where that bending is by your choice, or you can show a type of alacrity and, a type of emotional and physical fitness to get out of situations, that to me reminds me so much of places we grew up in, where you found people, I think about the primary classroom and I think about my mom, who would make these gastronomic miracles come to life in the kitchen when she had very few, pennies for ingredients. She was able to roll with her situation and make magic out of her situation that she was in. Or I'd be in these communities and, people would find ingenious ways to stay alive or to make money for their families. They learned a type of street art that I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for now, when you and I sit in these air-conditioned offices and, we rub shoulders with other people in the middle class and we forget, I don't want to make assumptions about where you're from, but from where I'm from, I can't forget where I come from, my communities, where the gangs were a real thing, where drugs were a real thing. And so I bring some of, I think, that bounce to the writing in pieces that make that appeal to people, to remember that, our legacy of understanding and behavior comes from our parents and communities who had to shapeshift, who had to make things happen. And so should we.
So in the book, you talk about how cleaning is therapeutic for you, and you also remind us to find fresh air in our lives. How will this help us as we navigate in our daily lives, Iman?
I think we are creatures of comfort in many ways, creatures of familiarity and creatures of safety, and, navigating within the boundaries of our comforts and our comfort zones, even our mindsets, because it keeps us safe. Nobody wants to be challenged and have to defend their positions. I remember when my mom used to get really angry, it was the cushions that suffered in our house. It was the carpets that suffered. It was surfaces that suffered because she brutalized them with Mr. Min and, Cobra and all of these things. And it was passed on to us. And we understood a response to our situation in how clean our houses could be. And it was also a reflection of the whole good girl, good wife syndrome, which is programmed into us and engraved into us when we're so young. If somebody comes to visit your house and in your nightie, if you live in the hood at 12 o'clock, you were judged. You were a girl that didn't have her house in order, So we learn those things. And even to this day, as I talk to you, my housekeeper is furiously cleaning because I love everything to be pristine and in its place. But it's also that way internally with me. If I know that there's an issue that I've left unresolved, or there's a fight with someone I've had that I really need to mend, like I need to mend that fence, I will go and do it. Because I find it very hard to live with these layers upon layers of misunderstanding and missed opportunities between myself and other people. So it's really interesting how those two things kind of puzzle fit together.
And Iman, can you briefly just share one sermon that you will not forget and tell us why?
Oh, it's going to be so hard to do that. Because all of these sermons are really like my children. I think for me, what's beautiful is more on the poetic side, because I've taken a risk with kind of writing poetry. I mean, I've been writing poetry since I was a teenager, and to actually have them published in my book, and have it out there for people to look at, is something that's almost so private. Like writing sentences as a journalist, that's our craft, that's our art, that's what we're good at. But segue, kind of meandering down the path of poetry is slightly more dangerous. So if you want me to, I'm more than happy, to read maybe a little poem. There's a context to it. There was a guy that I kind of had this love affair with in Paris, of all places, one of the most romantic cities in the world. And I wrote this poem for him shortly after I said goodbye to him on the Paris Underground. So I'm going to read it to you. Walking with you was worship. Each step a confirmation of being, as sure as our feet connecting with the ancient cobbles of a Paris street. It feels better just knowing that you are alive, even if I never set eyes on you again. Like gravity, I don't need to see to believe that you are there, and that perhaps on some warm summer's day you would think of me and smile, or that you would catch a playful scent on a breeze that would bring me to you for just a moment in time. As we stood across from each other on an underground train to goodbye, a street pole bore the weight of our need for stability. It stood between your face and mine as we leaned into it, but spirit finds no obstacle in material things. You looked at me and I at you, and it was enough. You leave me with more than just the beautiful memory of a morning picnic alongside the same famous flanks of song and suicide, with more than just an intoxicating baptism of perfume. You leave me wanting to live more beautifully, to know that Eden can be anywhere we truly take ourselves, and I will always love you for that.
You must have loved this person, Iman.
For that moment, I'm very much a photograph gatherer. So
Wow.
hopefully stories can last into 2-3 chapters and maybe become an entire novel. That would be fantastic, but we don't always get that blessing in our lives. So for the moments that we get to share excitement, adventure, novelty, I think we should lust in those moments for that moment and let it be, and then just put it away in this, sort of photographic archive of our experiences.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible. But now the question that I have to ask now makes my heart break. Because now in the book you also talk about breaking the chains, and you say we need to give our children dreams and also talk about them before we lose them. Tell us about that meeting that you attended at the Narcotics Anonymous.
So it was in Lenasia, probably about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I was struggling, as I write in the book, with that issue in my own family. And it was a very hard meeting to attend. And also the associations, especially, for where, and this was a group of mostly young men. In fact, they were all young men who were trying to recover from their various addictions. And I never thought I'd find myself in that circumstance. I never thought that it would strike so close to home. And so it was a very revealing moment, and it was also a very emotional moment. And as I write in that piece, I began to cry. But there are chains of all types and addictions of all types that we have in our lives. We're addicted to people, we're addicted to certain circumstances that are very toxic for us, but we won't let them go because it's what we know, and it's a place in a paradoxical way that we feel really comfortable in. So Breaking the Chains is a rehab facility in the south of Johannesburg, and a man there who runs it does some really, really good work in the context where rehabilitation and addiction care is very scarce in our country, especially for maybe middle to lower income people. I'd taken this family member with me there on an excursion to see what this was like as we were trying to find a solution for him. And it really made me sad about the primary decisions that lead us on a path to self-destruction. Like, what was that first experience and encounter that bought you this ticket for an endless period of suffering, not only for you and your families? Sane, it is about, in all of these pieces, it is about taking a moment to look a little bit deeper than the surface. Because we judge so easily. We build conclusions based on what we see in a drive-by image or what we think of people. And it's really just an invitation to peel back a few more layers, to go a little deeper, and to always gaze upon situations with the countenance of kindness.
Wow, that was touching for me. And lastly, Iman, what else will the readers get if they buy this copy?
First of all, they must go and buy. Because,
Definitely.
many mornings and many nights, not just for myself, but in fact, even if they don't buy my book, but support an author today. Because I think it's important. And I think a reading culture, we can never overemphasize encouraging people to adopt a reading culture. We need it in our country. But in this book, I mean, I think the feedback, at least that I've gotten, because I don't want to speak only from my perspective, let's just say the people that I've spoken to who've read it have said that they've been really touched by different aspects. And this notion of understanding the texture in our lives rather than just the dimension of our lives is so important and added value for them. They've seen the poetry, they've seen the realism, they've seen the call to revolution, the call to act, the call to kindness, empathy, self-care. So if you're interested in those themes and maybe how to live a little more richly and less harshly to ourselves, then Sermons of Soul by Iman Rappetti is definitely for you.
That was Iman Rappetti speaking to Krima Media's Polity about her second book titled Sermons of Soul.